It's not unheard of for parents to do things to their kids. We hear of cases every year involving children that have been severely injured or even killed because of their parents. Just look at Gabriel Fernandez, a sweet little boy who died because his parents were, to put it bluntly, pure evil. But we can usually tell if a child is in danger at home. Their parents are careless, they leave their kids alone for days at a time, or flip out at the tiniest little thing. What we never see coming is when a parent appears to love their kid more than anything, and then suddenly that child is dead and everything about their passing is suspicious. That was the case for Garnett Paul Thompson Spears, a 5-year-old boy who had his life cut short due to what seemed to be medical issues he'd had from birth, at least according to Lacey Spears, his mom. Lacey Spears always loved kids, and from a young age couldn't wait to become a parent herself. Her childhood friend Jessica Kyle revealed in an interview that when they were kids, Lacey used to carry around a baby doll everywhere and pretend it was her real child. Lacey also worked as a babysitter, then at a daycare after she graduated from high school. Before she became a mom, Lacey had a bad reputation for telling crazy stories about her life. When she one day started wearing a brace on her ankle, she told friends she'd hurt her foot cheerleading because she was weak and hadn't eaten enough due to an eating disorder. When she was 14 years old, Lacey told Jessica that she was pregnant, and a few weeks later, she'd have the pregnancy terminated. She was confronted by another girl who told her she couldn't have had the termination at the hospital she mentioned because it didn't perform that service and it had been closed for years. Lacey changed her story and said she'd actually went to Florida to have it done. Over the years, people would come and go from Lacey's life. She was said to be quiet but nice enough and always available to watch someone's kids for them. However, once the unrealistic stories started again, they would start to distance themselves from her. This happened a lot with people she babysat for. More than once, Lacey would post photos of the kids she looked after on her own social media, claiming that they were her children. Understandably, when the real parents found out about this, Lacey was not allowed to watch their kids anymore. That would definitely creep me out. Lacey even found ways to add drama to her life when she became pregnant. Lacey had been having a casual relationship with a man named Chris Hill for a couple of months, and when she announced she was pregnant, he wanted to do the right thing. The two talked about marriage and even bought books full of names as they started to plan what their life with a baby would look like. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Lacey changed completely. She claimed that Chris wasn't the father of her baby and that the father was actually a man called Blake. She pushed Chris out of her life completely and started telling everyone that Blake, the love of her life, was actually the baby's father. This rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially those closest to Lacey who'd never met anyone called Blake, let alone someone Lacey claimed was her soulmate. On December 3rd, 2008, 21-year-old Lacey gave birth to a little boy she named Garnett, and as soon as she could, she flooded her social media pages with pictures and posts about Garnett. She seemed to love all the attention she got from people, especially on Facebook. Lacey even went on to make a blog about her and Garnett's lives. Then things started to get really weird. Not long after Garnett was born, Lacey started telling people in real life and on social media that Blake had passed away in a car accident. At this point, no one aside from Lacey had ever met Blake, and there were no photos of him with baby Garnett. He wasn't even registered as Garnett's father on his birth certificate. Many of Lacey's friends and family reported that it was around this time that Garnett started to get sick, and in 1 year, he was admitted to the hospital 23 times. Lacey claimed that Garnett was refusing to eat, and when he did, he would throw up. Obviously, for a newborn baby, this is really worrying, as the first few weeks of life are super important to make sure the baby grows and gains weight. Garnett had 2 major surgeries. One was to install a feeding tube into his stomach so that Lacey could feed him without having to make him eat. Another was to close up a part of his throat so that he couldn't throw up. With these measures in place, Garnett started to improve, and doctors began suggesting the feeding tube should be removed so that he could eat a normal diet. Lacey wasn't a fan of that idea. A number of doctors told Lacey that Garnett didn't need a feeding tube anymore, but she insisted that he wouldn't eat otherwise. This was disputed by a number of sources, including teachers and family friends who saw Garnett eat like a normal kid a bunch of times. In fact, they commented that when Garnett ate, he almost ate too much, as if he hadn't had a full meal in a long time. Every time a doctor disagreed with Lacey about what they should do to keep Garnett healthy, she would change doctors until she'd visited everyone in her town. After that, she started moving around. Lacey moved from her hometown of Decatur, Alabama to Clearwater in Florida, where she and Garnett lived with Lacey's grandmother. However, this didn't last long. Lacey's new friends in Florida started to get suspicious of Lacey when they witnessed Garnett eating food like a normal kid, despite Lacey insisting that he couldn't keep food down and had to have nutrients through his feeding tube. After Florida, she moved to a commune in New York called the Fellowship Community. The community focused on living holistically, which meant eating a lot of organic food and working in nature. For a couple of years, they seemed to be doing really well here, and from Lacey's blog posts, it looks like they were enjoying life for the first time. Of course, this didn't last forever. Garnett continued to visit doctors often for treatment. Lacey claimed he was suffering from Crohn's and celiac disease, fevers, seizures, anything you could name. After a while, as they always do, medical professionals started to get suspicious because this boy who was apparently so sick always seemed totally fine whenever they saw him. Lacey knew she had to do something to make them believe Garnett was truly sick. On January 14th, 2014, Lacey called a friend and told her she needed to take Garnett to the emergency room. She said he had a high fever and he was having seizures, so she and her friend took Garnett to Nyack Hospital. At the hospital, they did tests to see if Garnett could be suffering from a seizure disorder like epilepsy. They also put a video camera in front of Garnett's bed to see if they could pinpoint when the seizures happened. After 2 days in the hospital, Garnett seemed totally fine and they told Lacey he could go home. Just a few minutes later, their lives would be changed forever. Garnett suddenly started to show the symptoms Lacey had been telling them about all this time, and the hospital staff jumped into action, believing he was suffering from a seizure. However, despite their best efforts, it was already too late for Garnett. His brain had swollen inside his skull. This caused him to fall into a coma, and a few days later, he was pronounced brain dead. This means that he was only being kept alive by machines, and he would never recover. During this time, Lacey did not stop posting on social media. Her Facebook page was covered in posts by herself and others sending prayers to Garnett. Not everybody was supportive. The friend that took Lacey and Garnett to the hospital was really bothered by this. It was not the behavior of a grieving mother. She was more concerned about what everyone else was saying or what investigators were asking people or what people were saying on Facebook than putting all that aside and taking care of her child. They did tests on Garnett after he passed to see if they could figure out what had made him so sick and ultimately ended his life. What they found shocked everyone. Garnett had died from hypernatremia of unknown etiology, which essentially means he was poisoned with salt, and they couldn't figure out how it got into his system. One doctor commented that Garnett's salt levels were higher than he'd ever seen in a human being, and there was no way that Garnett's body or any sickness was responsible for this. The hospital contacted the police and social services, now believing that Lacey had poisoned her son. The police started investigating Lacey, and it wasn't hard to gather evidence against her. First of all, there was Garnett's medical history. A bunch of his old doctors testified that they thought Lacey's insistence on certain treatments for Garnett was suspicious, and more than once they documented that Garnett's salt levels were too high. When they searched Lacey's apartment, they found 2 open containers of salt in her kitchen, and a neighbor later came forward and confessed that they'd hidden a bag from the feeding tube that contained a high level of salt at Lacey's request. One of the most damning pieces of evidence by far was the tape from the camera that had been used to monitor Garnett. Just after Lacey was told Garnett was well enough to go home, the video shows her hiding feeding equipment and a white bag in her jacket. Then, she takes Garnett into the bathroom with his feeding tube, and when they come back into the room, he starts to have seizures right away. After 2 months of investigation, Garnett's death was officially ruled as a homicide, and Lacey was arrested. Lacey was diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental illness in which a caregiver makes up or causes illness or injury in a person under their care, such as a child, an elderly adult, or a person who has a disability. No one is sure what caused MSBP or why people develop it, but it's thought that the constant attention a caregiver gets when looking after someone vulnerable encourages them to continue. It was decided that MSBP was the reason why Lacey poisoned Garnett throughout his life, as she thrived off the attention her son's poor health got on social media. She was found guilty of second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter, earning her a 20-year prison sentence. The judge that delivered Lacey's sentencing described her as mentally unstable, and her crime is bottomless in its cruelty. Lacey has reported that she's been bullied relentlessly in prison, particularly at mealtimes when other inmates pour salt all over her food. It's crazy to me how Lacey was able to keep with this for so long. It reminds me of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who was so tired of her mom constantly making her sick that she killed her just to escape from her. Garnett must have been in pain for so long. I hope now he's finally at peace. What do you guys think of this case? Do you think Lacey ever really meant to kill Garnett, or was it an accident she caused because of her own illness? I'm really interested to see what you guys think down in the comments below. Bye!